Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about something huge that's happening in workplaces all across the European Union. There's a new directive that is completely set to change how we think about, and more importantly, how we talk about our salaries. So let's get right into it.
So, to really get this, we've got to start with the why. Why was this law even needed in the first place? Well, for decades, there's been this persistent pay gap between men and women. And honestly, progress on closing it has been painfully slow.
So, picture this. Back in 2020, the average gender pay gap across the entire EU was 13%. And here's the kicker. Despite all the talk and all the efforts, that number has been stuck, really stuck, for the better part of a decade. It was a pretty clear sign that whatever we were doing before just wasn't cutting it. So you have to ask, right, why has this gap been so incredibly hard to close? Well, it turns out a huge part of the problem has been a culture of, pay secrecy. When nobody talks about what they earn, it becomes this perfect breeding ground for inequality, sometimes without anyone even meaning for it to happen.
But, okay, here's a really important question. Does every single pay gap automatically mean there's discrimination going on? To really get to the bottom of this, you have to understand that there are actually two different kinds of pay gaps we're talking about here.
Okay, so first you've got the unadjusted pay gap. Think of this as like the 10,000-foot view. It's just the raw difference in what men and women earn, on average. But then you have the adjusted pay gap. This one's more like putting things under a microscope. It takes into account all those objective things. Job role, how much experience you have, your education, to see what difference is left.
Let me give you a quick example to make this super clear. Let's say a company looks at its numbers and sees a 10% unadjusted gap. Now, they might dig in and find that, say, 6% of that is because they have more men in senior roles, for instance. But what about that last 4%? That's the adjusted gap. It's the part that can't be explained by those factors. And that is what really points a finger towards potential pay discrimination for people doing similar work. All right, so to go after both of these issues, the big picture opportunity gap and that nitty-gritty equal pay for equal work problem, the European Union has rolled out a really landmark solution. It's called the EU Pay Transparency Directive. And its mission really is simple, but it is so powerful: to pull back the curtain on how people are paid. The whole idea is that by making things more open, it gets a lot harder for bias, conscious or not, to sneak into pay decisions. And you might be wondering, who does this actually apply to? Well, it's pretty broad. It hits all employers in the EU with 100 or more employees, and it covers all workers. We're talking part-time, fixed-term contracts, apprentices, you name it. And this is really important. The protections kick in before you even have the job, when you're still just an applicant. Okay, so let's get to the good stuff. What does this actually mean for you? Because this isn't just theory. These are brand new, concrete rights that you'll have at work. First off, the whole hiring game is about to change. It's getting way more transparent. For starters, employers now have to give you the starting pay or the pay range for a job right in the job notice, or at the very least before the interview. And second, and this one is a huge deal, they can't ask you what you used to make. They're just not allowed anymore. This is so important because it helps break that old cycle where a lower salary in your past follows you around and keeps your future earnings down.
But it doesn't just stop at the hiring process. The transparency continues once you're on the job. You now have a formal right to information, which is a seriously powerful new tool.
So what does that actually mean? It means you can go to your employer and ask for information on how your individual pay stacks up against the average pay levels for people doing the same work or work of equal value, and that's broken down by gender. And that phrase, work of equal value, is key. It doesn't just mean the exact same job title. It means jobs that might look different on the surface but require similar levels of skill, effort, and responsibility. Now, this isn't about finding out what your desk mate Sarah makes specifically. It's about getting the averages so you can see if you're being paid fairly in the grand scheme of things. All right, so having rights is one thing, but making sure they're followed is another. That's why this directive puts some serious new responsibilities on companies to make sure they're actually being held accountable. This whole thing is being rolled out in a couple of phases. So by June 2027, the bigger companies, the ones with 150 or more employees, they have to start reporting their pay data. And then a few years later, by June 2031, the next group, companies with 100 to 149 employees, they'll have to start reporting too.
Okay, I want you to remember this next number. It's 5%. And it's not just some random number. It's a really important trigger. It's the point where companies have to do something. So, what happens if a company finds a gender pay gap of 5% or more in any group of workers, and they can't justify it with real, objective reasons that have nothing to do with gender? Well, this is where the directive really has some teeth. If that happens, it triggers what's called a joint pay assessment. Basically, the company can't just look at the data and say, oh, well. They are now legally required to team up with employee representatives, do a super deep dive into their pay structures, figure out what's going wrong, and then, and this is the most important part, create a real plan to fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again.
You know, at the end of the day, this whole directive is about way more than just new rules and paperwork. It's really about building better, fairer, and honestly more successful workplaces. And there's a ton of research to back this up. When companies are open about pay, it just builds trust. Simple as that. It makes the link between performance and pay crystal clear, which is a huge motivator. It shrinks the space where unconscious bias can hide and influence decisions. And let's be honest, in a competitive job market, it gives them a massive advantage in finding and keeping the best people. So really, the smart companies aren't looking at this like a chore. They're seeing it as a golden opportunity. A chance to build a place that's not only more fair, but also stronger, more collaborative, and a place where people actually want to work. And that really brings us to the core of it all. This new directive, it's not just a new rule. It's not something to be filed away in a drawer. It's the start of a brand new conversation, a really essential one about what we value, what's fair, and what it means to trust each other at work. So the real question is your workplace ready for it?